So, by the way, we have way more questions here than I'm going to be able to pose. I'm trying to combine them together as I can. The climate bill's success, if passed, will require good public transit in hundreds of transit-poor communities. Without transit, how can we get people out of their cars, even if the costs of fuel skyrocket? So what do we do about the transportation end of this?
And look, the fact is oil prices will move back up. There's just no question that the minute we come out of this economic period, they're not making more oil. There are supply limits. We don't control the pricing of it. Other nations do, and oil prices will move back up. I don't think there's any question about that. I spoke a minute ago about the fact that buildings account for 40% of carbon emissions, the biggest single impact on global warming. The next biggest impact is transportation, 30% of our carbon emissions. In California, it's a little higher. So, but if you really think about it, the way we build our buildings and build our cities is 70% of our carbon emission impact. So I think it requires, as I said, a massive effort to bring energy efficiency to buildings. But also, what we need to do is we need to build cities that are more compact, more walkable, more transit-oriented. Ironically, that New York is now increasingly viewed as probably the greenest city in America because it's highly dense, very public transit-oriented. So we need to change our land use and design patterns, but we also need to shift federal investments from roadways to public transit. Now, the stimulus bill made a pretty significant investment in public transit, but it was just the start. And I talked a little bit about the climate bill. There will also be a debate this year on the transportation bill. And a critical decision that will be made in Washington is whether we're going to make a dramatic shift towards public transit or whether they're going to continue this pattern of funding a roadway system to get the lion's share of the funding. We will be active at Apollo, and we hope you will be also. There's a national coalition called T for America, I believe, T for America, which is a national coalition of which we're a part to make sure that federal funding tilts much more dramatically towards public transit. It's where we need to go, because that's where 70% of the emissions come from, buildings and the way we build our cities and the way we travel.
Meat consumption is a huge drain on land, water, fossil fuels, cruelty to animals, et cetera, et cetera. Can you talk about the way that food systems fit into a clean energy future?
This is not my area of expertise. I'm actually a beginning student in this area, beginning to read the works of Michael Pollan, who's right down the street in Berkeley. Look, I think it goes back to my earlier comment, though. We got to think about everything we do in almost every sector. Shorter supply lines are better supply lines for the economy and the environment generally. I do believe that one of the things that may well happen here in the years to come is from power generation to food production, we're going to go to smaller, more sustainable nodules rather than large-scale industrial models. I mean, I think we're seeing that in the power industry, where the old model used to be big mega power plants, and more we're going to distributed generation. I believe there's going to be a similar movement in the food industry to go to more and more local and organic. First of all, because of people's health, education, and awareness, but also because, like I said, shorter transportation costs are less carbon emissions. One of the key arguments for manufacturing renewable energy parts in America is, if you're importing them from China, you're not just, you're obviously not creating jobs here, but you're also consuming a lot of diesel, a lot of emissions to get products across the seas. And I think we need to go to much more local production and consumption generally in this economy.
So I've got two more questions here. There's a lot of money in the stimulus packet. How do we assure that that money doesn't become this abstraction, but then actually gets funneled down to local communities, and especially local communities with displaced workers from older industries? How do we assure that that money gets spent locally, and how do we even know about it?
Yeah, first of all, there is a website, and I don't know that I have it off. Do you know what it is? Thank you, Mac Lynch. Recovery.gov, that will be tracking where money flows. And so I would recommend that you go to recovery.gov and see who's getting money at the local level, and then organizing to find out how they're going to apply that money. Because really, at the end of the day, you know, if you look at the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, the guidelines are pretty broad, but there are big hunks of money coming down that communities have pretty wide latitude in terms of how they spend that money. An example is there was about $3.8 billion this year, I think, for the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program. Yeah, it's the old Everett Dirksen line. You remember Everett Dirksen? Some of you may be old enough. He was a senator from Illinois in the 1960s, and he used to say, a billion here, a billion there. Pretty soon you're talking real money. But there will be billions of dollars coming down. And for example, there's a program called the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Program. Local communities can use that for a wide variety of purposes. It's pretty broad. It really is going to fall to local communities and organizations to kind of get with the city of Oakland, to get with Alameda County to find out how they're spending that money and to make sure they're spending in a way that's accountable and transparent. And one of the things we would urge people to do is get very active at the local level. There's also money, for example, coming to the state energy program. I think about $3 billion statewide, again, for energy efficiency. And you should be able to track this stuff, but organize at the local level to find out how they're using the money to see if it really meets the objectives.
Does nuclear energy hold any future in a green economy?
Well, let me tell you what Apollo's decided to do on this issue. I mean, we felt it was important that there be a broad national coalition pushing for a clean energy economy. So, you know, while I have my personal doubts on nuclear energy, Apollo, we don't have a position because we figure there are 9 to 10 big things we can do already as a coalition that will make a measurable difference. So we're focusing on the 9 things our coalition members agree on, because it's very powerful to have labor leaders and environmental leaders and business leaders in the same room with decision makers. We've decided to focus on the 9 things that we can get done and are big, rather than fight about the one that divides our group. Personally, I've got reservations about it. And I happen to think that there are many other routes where you don't have the same kind of political battles. I'd rather spend the next 5 years working on the 9 big things that will move us towards a clean energy economy than fighting about the one for the next 5 years on which there is no clear consensus. If the consensus emerges, if people become satisfied the technology's there, that there's adequate ways to store waste, at a point at which there is reasonable political and scientific consensus, it's something that we ought to talk about. But in the meantime, we got work to do.
I couldn't resist this last question. It says, "We love you, Phil. Would you please run for governor again?"
Did my staff guy write that question just to make me feel good? I'm very grateful for that, but not this weekend. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Let's give another big round of applause for Phil Angelides.